International Summit, and she was kind enough to come on the podcast, so I am so excited. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I am excited that you're here, and we're going to talk about your personal journey and professional journey and in international education, and about your new project, the Community College International Education Research Initiative that launched earlier this year. So welcome, and can you tell us about yourself and how you got to be at William and Mary and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said in the introduction, I'm currently an assistant professor of higher education at William and Mary, where I work. I work with our doctoral program and our master's program in higher education, and we have one of each. But like many people who are in faculty roles, my pathway was not linear. My academic background is in Spanish linguistics. So I went to college. When I went to college, I wanted to, if I can quote my younger self, I wanted to learn as many languages as possible so I could speak with as many people as possible. So if that's any indication of, my orientation has always been towards the international. I remember when I was a kid having a pen pal or two in other countries and thinking that was just really cool. The community where I grew up hosted refugee populations at several different points in time while I was in school. And so, I remember wanting to be friends with the students who were from a different part of the world and that sort of thing. So I don't really know what it was about my growing up experience that made me so interested in global topics and international stuff and that sort of thing. But there was something about, the environment I grew up in that really pushed me in that direction. So I've always been interested. Yes, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking, you're probably inspired just by curiosity about the world, right?
Right,
What's happening.
Exactly. I've always been curious about the world. And so, it's not surprising that when I went to college, I wanted to do something that had an international focus. And so, as many students do when they major in a foreign language, I studied abroad while I was an undergraduate. I had been abroad before when I was in high school, but just the one time. It was a week-long trip that a couple of my high school teachers sponsored, and I worked really hard at my part-time job and saved up the money to pay my way to go. And it was, an amazing experience. We use the word life-changing when we talk about spending time abroad, and it really was. It really solidified what I thought I wanted to do with my career at that point in time. And so, I studied abroad as an undergraduate. I have a master's degree in Spanish linguistics. I spent time teaching English abroad in Spain. I've traveled around Latin America and associated with my studies in Spanish linguistics. And I ended up becoming interested in international education. Through some work. I had a job where I was taking high school students abroad with a program that's through Indiana University, and I was taking students abroad to learn Spanish. And I remember being increasingly frustrated about the students who were able to access that program and the students who were not represented in the groups of students that we were taking abroad. And so as I was thinking about future career moves and what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, I wanted to go into international education in some way. And, and I wanted to do work around this topic of access to study abroad. And so that's what led me to doing a PhD in higher education. And I wrote my dissertation about stratification and study abroad opportunity. And one of the chapters of my dissertation was about community colleges. So I really come to studying community colleges through international education rather than the other way around. I think the other way around may be more common, where people are community college scholars and then they become interested in international education, but my pathway was actually the opposite. I was looking for contexts that are examples of ways of providing access to international opportunities for students who otherwise are less likely to participate if we think about the broader higher ed context in the United States. So that's how I came to study community colleges. When I graduated with my PhD, my first job was a postdoctoral researcher position in a research center that focused on community colleges. So that certainly helped me continue that strand of my research. This particular center was in North Carolina. It's at NC State University. So I was able to get to know people in international education across the state of North Carolina. And then I was a faculty member for a few years at the School for International Training, and then now this is the end of my first year at William & Mary. So that's a bit of my pathway as an academic and how I came to study what I study.
Well, I mean, that's, I think that your pathway definitely led you right into the community colleges and international. It seems like a very melded together kind of path. But I will say one thing, you reminded me when you said you had a pen pal. I just remembered I had a pen pal when I was in junior high in Japan as well. Totally slipped my mind. We did things like wrote letters and everything else. Now it's, WhatsApp and a quick email, right? That's kind of how students would be communicating if they were communicating with somebody abroad, right?
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Community College International Education Research Initiative? That seems like a very impressive name for your program. So what inspired you to do it? What is it all about?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad that the name sounds impressive. I went through
impressive.
several iterations of what to call it, right? And I will say, before I talk about the research initiative, I will just, on the subject of pen pals, my first pen pal was from Germany, and we wrote letters back and forth. I mean, we were so young that I remember her English not being very good when we started writing letters. And I saw her last summer. I was over in Germany for work-related reasons, and we saw each other, and we realized that we are each other's oldest friend. I've known her longer than any other friend, other friend that I still maintain contact with. So that's pretty cool.
That is really, I'm so impressed that you even keep in touch. I definitely have not kept in touch with I'm a bad person and I have not kept in touch with my pen pal from junior high, but I wonder if I probably don't even have the letters after all the moves, you do throughout your life, all the stuff that gets thrown away. And I don't have any of those letters. That's so sad.
Social media is amazing. Anyway,
I know.
Research initiative.
Yes. Yes.
So the research initiative is really it's a result of me changing jobs. And at William & Mary, I just have access to a lot more resources to conduct research than I did previously. The School for International Training is a fantastic institution, but it is a teaching-focused institution. So I did a lot of teaching while I was there. Whereas William & Mary being an R1 institution, there's just more resources that can be devoted to research. So I have a fantastic research assistant that supports my work, and then I have a number of graduate students that do work related to my research for free. They don't get paid. It's not their job. They're doing it because they want the experience, which is really great. And
they probably get paid. They probably pay, right, to go to school and be graduate students. They pay to work for you.
Some of them, right?
Yes.
But they want the experience,
yes,
right? And
absolutely.
I hope that there are future benefits to the experience that they're getting by helping me with my research for free.
Yes.
And of course there's also other resources in the William & Mary environment that are available for research that I didn't really have access to before. So this research initiative has actually been a goal of mine for a very long time. I was just finally in a place where I could make it happen. And it comes out of a lot of my research. If you read through some of my past work, it's focused on single institutions. It's data that I've gathered from one community college or two community colleges, or, I've been really fortunate that community colleges have been willing to just give me data, right? Data that they already collect for other reasons. They've just given me access for my work. And that is great. And the results of those studies are certainly valuable to the colleges that give me access to data. It's also valuable to colleges that are similar in terms of characteristics. But one of the critiques of that previous work is that it's not nationally representative. So I can't speak to generally, what is community college international education like? I can really only speak to that one institutional context that I have data from. And so what I wanted this research initiative to do was to really be a centralized place where we collect data from and about community college international education that is as close to nationally representative as we can get. You know, we do the best we can with the resources that we have. The data we've collected so far is certainly not perfect, but I do think it is a step in the right direction of being able to really speak to what does the landscape of community college international education really look like. And I'm glad to go into in a bit more depth some of our projects, but that's the general idea behind the research initiative, is really to be a centralized location where those kinds of resources and that kind of research can be found.
And I will, at the local level, like at Harper, you know, I will say the same kind of internationalization seems to exist. It's just in like pieces, right? You're getting information about one college, but even within the college, the international is in pieces, because one department's doing one thing, another one is doing study abroad, somebody's doing virtual exchanges, somebody's doing internationalization of their curriculum and all of that. And we try to unify it and put it, and we have an office, as you know, at Harper for that. But I also feel like as coming into this, you know, I'm now on the international committee and, you know, working with the office and trying to do my own virtual exchanges and study abroad and all of that. I feel like it is still, like, global education is piecemeal. Like, everybody's doing kind of and maybe because I have done my own thing and really didn't tell anybody what I was doing until we, you know, like, came into it and said, like, well, what are other people doing? And it's fantastic to get data and to figure out what other people are doing so you can, you know, measure you know, assess and measure and figure out if you're being effective. I mean, I think any international efforts are effective at some point during the student's life, right? It may not be instant, but it'll be in the future. There'll be some realization, some, you know, appreciation for what they've learned. It may not be instant, I think, but I just think it's, you know, I feel that way, not just, you know, I think it's wonderful that you're gathering data so we can all benefit from that as community colleges and how to do this international education, what is, you know, effective, and how to get, you know, the most effective programs in place so that we can affect as many students as possible, not just a small selection of students. So I'll ask you, what do you think international education at community college level is often, like, why is it overlooked, and how can we change that? What have you found in your data as well? Like, what are some things that you found?
Yeah, so that speaks to one of my other motivations for starting the research initiative. It came from a place of frustration from me, where, you know, I would be at international focused conferences or international focused research circles, and I would say, like, well, I study international education at community colleges, and people would say, well, community colleges don't do international education, or but, like, what's that like? I've never heard of it, or something like that, you know. And as I continued to work in the field, you know, it became increasingly obvious to me that community college international education is a lot more prevalent than we really think it is. And if you look at national data from the U.S., from somewhere like the Institute of International Education, it very much does give the impression that that very few community colleges are really active in international education. And as I continued to work with community colleges and talk to people in international education roles, you know, I had this suspicion that was actually not true. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to collect this data, and which, if you go on our website, what we have done so far is we have an inventory. I pulled a list of all the community colleges in the United States, and we searched on institutional websites for evidence of different ways of engaging in international education. So study abroad, enrolling international students, virtual international exchange, and several other different opportunities. And you know, what we found was that it actually is more widespread than any of the other data that's out there would really lead you to believe. And so I think one of the one thing that prevents community colleges from being so prevalent as they should be in international education conversations is the lack of data. So like if people don't know that it's happening, if we can't say like X percentage of community colleges have study abroad programs, then that gives the impression that it doesn't exist. And so one of the issues that I saw out there in the field that I wanted to fix with this research initiative is I wanted us to be able to point to a data point and say, well, actually 40% of community colleges offer study abroad. That's not an inconsequential number.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's part of why community colleges have been absent from that conversation that they should have been a part of.
So what are the programs that you're doing? Like you said that you have several programs that you could describe for us. So what types of programs are you doing with this research initiative?
Yeah, so, and these are specific research projects, right? So one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at this data that we've collected about different international education opportunities and asking questions about what kinds of colleges are more likely to offer those opportunities. So when is a college more likely to offer study abroad? Where do we see virtual exchange being especially prominent? And thinking about how different colleges serve different kinds of student populations, and what does that mean for the kind of international opportunities that they offer? So that's one bucket of what we're doing.
I want to know the answer to that.
Coming soon. I hope that we'll have a report this summer that will speak to that. That's on my to-do list. Actually,
I'm excited about that. I'm like, ooh, what are other schools doing? Who's doing what and where? What kind of population do they have? No, I'm totally really, that's fantastic. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Another study that we are doing is focusing on international student services. So as my research team and I, as we were going through these websites and documenting international opportunities, one thing that we noticed is that most community colleges enroll international students, which is perhaps not surprising. That's true of most higher education institutions in the United States. So why not community colleges too? But what we noted was that there seems to be two types of institutions, two types of community colleges that enroll international students and appear to provide pretty significant supports for that student population. And then community colleges that enroll international students, and really the only information we could find on their website was that, yes, they enroll international students. There was no evidence of these kinds of supports that international students might need that are different from what domestic students need.
Right.
So we wanted to interrogate that a bit more, and it may be that we end up calling out some community colleges and saying, like, you're enrolling students and not serving them. But we don't really know that based on what we've done so far. We want to do a more systematic investigation of that. So that's another study that we're doing. And then thinking about more domestic students, we are currently in the middle of collecting some survey data to explore how financial support relates to student participation in study abroad at community colleges, with the idea of hopefully identifying different strategies for financial support that can encourage marginalized student participation, for example, or just participation in general, right? What ways of providing scholarships or grants to students that seems to work better in terms of access to those study abroad opportunities. So those are three different projects that we're working on right now.
So I remember during our summit, you presented some data on virtual exchanges versus study abroads. Do you want to cover that a little bit? Just kind of some of the basic findings that you had?
Yeah, sure. So, and I won't try to sugarcoat it. What we did find is that virtual exchange seems not have much impact on some of the outcomes that we really hope that maybe a more traditional study abroad program might have. So the study that you're referring to is one that looked at global perspective taking. And we used a very well-known and well-documented measurement instrument to explore global perspective taking. And there's pretty significant and convincing research out there already that indicates that, yes, studying abroad can improve global perspective taking among participants. And we found that just wasn't the same for virtual exchange. We found no significant impact of virtual exchange programs. Now, how do we understand that result is a different story. And I think those of us who have implemented virtual exchange programs and been involved in them in some way, like, there is certainly an impact of those programs, right? I don't think that it's that students don't get anything out of the experience, but it invites us to think more critically about what students are getting out of those experiences. And then, how are we designing the program to achieve those goals? Back, say, 20 years or so, we were sort of in so virtual exchange is not new. Virtual exchanges have been happening for a very long time, really since technological advances made them possible. But they have not been nearly as widespread as study abroad in terms of international education practices. And, 20 years ago, we were in a place with study abroad where there was this sort of mindset that really all we needed to do was get students abroad, that access was enough, that once they got abroad, they would just learn, right? That, like, being in contact with another culture is enough for students to learn. And I think we know now that that's not true, especially when we're thinking about short-term study abroad programs. Those programs need to be intentionally designed for students to gain what we want them to gain from the experience. And I think that we may be in a similar place with virtual exchange right now, where it's not sufficient to just put students together with each other in a Zoom room. We have to curate those experiences and intentionally design them so that students are working towards particular outcomes.
I totally agree with you, and I feel like when I did my virtual exchange with just the business club students, I didn't do it through a class. I think I got out of it more than they did as faculty, and I can totally understand. I mean, ours was not, I didn't have outcome because it was not through a class. It was just, here, let's do a virtual exchange, and it was great, and they got to meet people, and we did all of that. But I think when you do it as a class, you definitely need to make sure that there's measurement of what you're supposed to be doing. And like I said, I felt like I got a lot out of it. I have contacts now, and I talk to people, and I just learned so much from that experience. And I don't know if they did the same thing outside of the virtual exchange itself, which I had that because I was talking to the other faculty as we were planning the virtual exchange, right? And I don't know if they had those kind of interactions outside of what we did in the whatever few hours that we met and the project that they worked on. So I totally agree with you with that, and I think, like you said, we just need to build those exchanges to get to the outcomes that we want and to have that, the measurement to see if we are reaching what they need to reach, just like with the short-term study abroads, like it's the same kind of mentality, I think, of, making sure that you are getting what you want out of that experience and getting those cultural experiences as well. Totally agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's also completely okay to just accept that virtual exchange has different outcomes than study abroad. Mm-hmm. They don't have to be the same, and that's okay.
Right. I totally agree with that. So you've studied the outcomes of international education. What do we know about how these experiences impact students? We've been talking about that, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This is a question that someone actually emailed me about recently. We had a nice little email exchange about underrepresented and marginalized students and the impact. She was interested particularly in study abroad. So there's actually, I don't want to say there's very little research out there about it. There's certainly some really excellent qualitative work that looks at specifics like study abroad program models and how those can have positive impacts on marginalized students, like in terms of identity development, engagement with the world, deeper understanding of themselves and their place in the world, things like that. From a quantitative perspective and a student success perspective, there is one research project. It's the CASSI initiative, which listeners may or may not have heard of, but it's CASSI spelled like the name, like short for Cassandra.
That's my daughter's name, so I can totally relate.
There you go. So everyone can remember. I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for off the top of my head. The IE is for international education. But they draw from four-year institution data, and what they end up finding is that study abroad does seem to have a greater impact on students with marginalized identities, and thinking about particularly students from lower income backgrounds and then students from marginalized racial and ethnic backgrounds. The reason we don't have anything similar in the community college context is, again, a question of data. Yes. The data set to answer those kinds of questions just doesn't exist. And that is one direction where I see the research initiatives work going, although that's just going to take a bit more time to build that data set, and it takes buy-in from the colleges themselves, who would have to provide access to data that we could use to do that kind of work. I do think it's a really promising area of research, especially in the community college context, given the student populations that community colleges often serve.
Yes.
And it's a question that we need to be thinking about and exploring.
Absolutely. And, I think that it would be nice to have a comparison, right, between what happens with the underrepresented populations versus the regular, the population, or however you want to look at it, right, the other population, and to see, what impact it has, and, to see what impact study abroad and even virtual exchange or any of these have, there may be more impact because they have not had the opportunities before, and so it would be wonderful to provide that for students in those populations that may not have even had the opportunities that other students may have had. So I think that's great, and I do realize, again, data, and we need to do that and keep track of that, and that's something I'm going to keep in mind now, like in even my own classes, of like keeping track of that information and all that data. And so you've done work with both qualitative and quantitative methods. Why is it important to have both perspectives when studying international education? Like, what do we measure quantitatively in international education? I guess I'm assuming people would want to know, like, well, what do you want to measure?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the short answer to your question is that the two different kinds of data give us different perspectives, right, and we need them both.
Exactly.
Right. So what quantitative data is really good at doing is providing us a big picture perspective. What are the general trends? Right. What if we look from a bird's eye view? What is the landscape like? Mm-hmm. And I think I've used that word several times in our conversation. Like, what are the general trends in community college and international education? Who implements what activities and perhaps why? Right. Well, why might we guess based on things like institutional characteristics or the demographics of the students who are enrolled? But what qualitative research is really good at is digging deeper, right? So, like, I might discover in my quantitative analysis that community colleges in a particular region of the country are very active in international education compared to other parts of the U.S. But what I can't tell you is why. Right? Like, we could make some educated guesses based on what we know about regional characteristics or student demographics or something like that. But I don't have any data to back up those educated guesses. And so what qualitative work can do is it can give us that deeper understanding of what could possibly be explaining this general trend that we're seeing. So we really need both kinds. And I say that we need both kinds of data, both to understand better, to reach a better understanding of international education and its impact, but also when we think about advocating for international education. There is no substitute for a really fantastic story about what a student gained from participating in a virtual exchange program. It pulls at the heartstrings. It really speaks to the personal impact that these kinds of programs have, and that can be incredibly persuasive.
Yes.
At the same time, the counter argument to that is, well, if it's only impacting one student, who cares, right? And so that's where the quantitative data comes in, where we can say, like, this is not an isolated incident. It's true for thousands of students.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's really wonderful work that you're doing, trying to get, all of the data, all of the stuff that's happening in community colleges, because I feel, at community colleges, I even see this, we have, quite a lot of transfer students in our program, and I feel like they're always like, well, I'll do my internship when I get to the 4-year school. I'll do my study abroad and I'm like, do it now. What are you waiting for? Do it now. Have more than one experience. It's okay to have 2 study abroads behind your belt, or a virtual exchange and a study abroad at 2 different institutions. And so I do feel like if you have this data and you show what community colleges are doing, then students will also be expecting that, and they'll want that, and they'll want those experiences as well. And so we'll get more students participating in those programs because they'll see the value that they're getting out of them as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So right now I've been involved in like all these COIL virtual exchange things myself. And what do you think virtual exchange and COIL programs can be, is it a good stepping stone for study abroad? Should we be focusing on those for maybe the underrepresented populations who may not be able to afford to go on study abroads? I mean, do you see those trends in the data so far, or is it really not? Are the COILs just not that impactful for that?
So, it brings up a lot of interesting questions for me about which educational opportunities we're providing to who.
Right.
And one of my concerns, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we switched to virtual forms of learning and really like COIL and virtual exchange became increasingly more prominent in international education, the conversation shifted to, isn't this great? We now have this alternative to study abroad, and that can provide more access to students. And certainly, like, virtual exchange has potential to create this access for students who, for whatever reason, won't be studying abroad. My concern, though, at that time, and still is that, now that we have these virtual exchange opportunities, we shouldn't be funneling students towards those opportunities just because they can't afford to study abroad.
Yes.
I think the focus should very much be on providing the educational opportunity that is the best fit for the student and their current situation and their goals. And for some students, that's going to be virtual exchange. For other students, that's going to be study abroad. But if we're doing that based on a student's financial situation, instead of thinking about their full educational experience, essentially we're creating a situation where the students who have resources study abroad and the students who don't have resources do virtual exchange. And that limits possibility on both ends. So I think that we have to be careful with how we're thinking about virtual exchange and its ability to improve access for students.
Yes. I agree with you, because I've been planning a study abroad, and one of the questions in the form that we fill out to do the study abroad is, if the students can't go on your study abroad in your class, are there other opportunities? And that's where I kind of start thinking, well, what can we do for them, for the students who wouldn't be going on the study abroad in this particular class? So I totally understand exactly what you're saying. Like, we shouldn't funnel them into a particular group, but that is a topic, right? That is a topic of conversation about how do you provide the resources for students who may not be taking the study abroad, even in that small, in just one class, one school, right? So,
I mean, absolutely, and especially if we're going to take the perspective that virtual exchange is a different experience from study abroad, and the outcomes are not the same, right? So we need to be thinking about helping students access whatever opportunity is best for them, and not letting finances be that deciding factor.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up, but I do want to ask you one quick question. What's a book, podcast, or article that you've recently read or listened to that inspired your work?
Oh gosh. I don't have a very positive answer to this question.
It doesn't have to be all. It doesn't have to be all rosy. Like, we can have a conversation.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not. The clearest example of this most recently is the Chronicle of Higher Education has been doing some excellent podcast episodes. I'm forgetting the name of their podcast series, but that is about the international students and the current political situation in the United States and how it is impacting international students. And those episodes inevitably make me angry in some way. And, when I was a PhD student, one of my advisors, her advice to me when I was thinking about a dissertation topic was, write about something that makes you angry. Because if it makes you angry, when you're sick and tired of looking at your dissertation and you don't want to open the file and you don't want to write anymore, your anger will propel you. And that I found that to be very true about research topics in general. And so those podcast episodes that make me angry about the state of the world have inspired some recent research.
Yes.
So
I can see that, yes. And, our school does provide, I think, a lot of resources for international students, and that has been a conversation we've been having over the past even before anything had started happening. So I want to thank you for coming on the podcast, for joining us, sharing your insights on research and equity and international education and, the whole community college space. I'm so looking forward to all of your research. We did your book for our book club for the international committee that we have, and so it was great, and I'm looking forward to more of your work. I think it's phenomenal, and you can learn more about Dr. Melissa Whatley's work at it's INTL for International Ed, so ccintled.pages.wm.edu. You can follow her on LinkedIn with Melissa Whatley. You can find her online. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please follow us on Instagram at Global Ed Unpacked. You can also watch the recorded show on our YouTube channel at Global Education Unpacked and listen to the audio version when I put it out there on your favorite podcast program. Thank you for coming on for our episode. I'm really thrilled to have you, and I'm thrilled that we were able to do this on Zoom, so I've never done that before on the podcast, so this is awesome. And this episode is recorded at WHCM Radio, produced by Matt Byrne, and features music by DJ Double Dip called Mint. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep exploring the world through education.
Thank you so much for having me.